Lantern, Chapter 34. That summer, the one in which Abigail was 80, was the summer of the great harvest. Nebraska was favored of the gods. Seir's throne was in Nebraska. It was as though she chose the state from all the others upon which to lavish her goods, as though the bulk of her fortune had been given to a favorite child. From the old Missouri to the foot of the sand hills, from the Kansas border to the land of the Dakotas, the wheat fields, like the sun's reflection, lay ripe under the July sky. In every direction one saw a thrasher belching out its yellow breath of wheat straw. The fields were springs from which never-ending brooklets of yellow wheat pouring into the thrashers rolled forth in golden streams to form a mighty river of grain. The barley, rye, and oats yield was also heavy. The beet sugar output was to be of gigantic proportions. A bumper corn crop loomed in promise for the fall. 300 million bushels were being predicted. Those who juggled with figures had said it would bring $400 million. The combined sum of all the grain figures was almost beyond comprehension. Poor conditions in many of the neighboring states and a shortage in production in the east and south added to the fancy that Nebraska seemed to hold the gifts of the gods in her lap that summer. The crop moved to market in an unprecedented volume. The various transportation systems had prepared for their part in this great procession of the grains. Tens of thousands of workers had bent their backs to the task. Tens of thousands of freight cars had been assembled at various points, awaiting the signal to move. And the grain came in, and the cars moved. To the east and to the west they moved for weeks, carrying new lifeblood to the nation. It filled old Abigail with an overwhelming pride. "Do you know, John," she said to her attorney son, "it makes me happy, proud and happy, when I think of all those early lean years, the droughts, the grasshoppers, the crop failures, and then this." Poor Nebraska, people said. They looked down on us as though we were a lot of destitute relations. They sent us old clothes and seeds and dried apples, and to think we're sending grain in great trainloads. "Mother," John chuckled, "to hear you, anybody would think you owned the state." "I do, John. She's mine in spirit. I feel as though she had been on trial before a world court and the trial dragged out over many years. We who loved her, had faith to believe that she would come through unscathed, and in these later years she's acquitted and vindicated. And to think she's one of the wealthiest states in the Union, the only one, I guess, with no bonded indebtedness. I wish your father might have lived to see it. He was so loyal and so faithful and so hopeful. He didn't live to see all his hopes fulfilled, but he did his part in making them materialize. They were prophets, John. Prophets in a strange country, those hardy young men who ferried across the Missouri and forded the Platte and the Weeping Water and the other streams. What a legacy they've left you all. Farm cities, cattle on 1,000 hills, manufactories, great educational institutions. Mother, that sounds quite oratorical. You can put all that into a speech up at Lincoln on the 29th. That's what I came over to see you about. They told me in Lincoln today that they wanted you to come up and speak at the unveiling of the Donovan marker. That's the 60th anniversary, you know, of choosing the site of Lincoln for the Capitol. They want those present who were here then." "Oh, but I wasn't here, John. That was almost a whole year before we came. I've only been here 59 years. 59 years is quite a while, Mother, and you're getting on to be one of the few left who came that long ago. They want you to make a little talk." "But what can you say in a few words, John, that will cover 59 years? I guess, 'Behold what God hath wrought' is the most condensed statement I can think of." And then it turned out that there was to be two big events for Abigail in July. Catherine's wedding, which was to have been in the fall, was suddenly set for the 20th. John was sending Jimmy Buchanan east on business, and in spite of the off-season time of year, the wedding was to take place so that Catherine could go with him. Already Catherine was being dined and feted and showered by her friends who were still in town. Sarah Lutz was in California and was not coming back. So you must be careful and not get sick, Granny, Catherine told her, or we wouldn't have either of you at the big doings. She and her mother had driven down one afternoon to see Abby. They brought her a lavender silk dress and a real lace cape collar, which Emma had bought in Vienna. You must be all dolled up, Granny, Catherine told her. You must be massaged and manicured, and you ought to have a permanent. I believe you would take a lovely one. She bent low over Grandmother's head and examined a strand of snow-white hair. It looks as though it might have had a bit of natural curl in it once. Oh, why couldn't they know? Why did an old woman seem always to have been old? Abby was back on the knoll near the big woods singing, her head thrown back, her thick hair curling and rippling over her creamy white shoulders. Why couldn't they understand that once she had kept tryst with youth? Why didn't they realize that someday they too must hold rendezvous with age? Yes, said old Abby Deal simply. It used to be quite curly. It was just before they left that Abby said, I have 2 presents for you, Kathy. 2, Granny? How lovely! Why 2? Well, one I'm making myself so that you will always have something of Grandma's handwork. The other, Kathy, is an heirloom, a string of little pearls. I want you not to plan for anything else on your neck. They're beautiful. Even you, with all your nice things, will be proud to own them. Fine, Granny, fine. Even so, it was said half carelessly. Things had come so easily to Kathy. In the next 2 weeks, Abby worked hard to finish the pink and white quilt with its rose-shaped blocks rambling up the borders. On the 19th, Grace came from summer school where she was teaching and left immediately for Omaha in her roadster, as she had some shopping to do before the wedding. Early on the morning of the 20th, Christine Reinmuller came over to receive her instructions from Abby for caring for the place. The chickens were to be fed. Abby gave minute directions for the ceremony. The laying hens in the chicken yard, whole corn out of one box. The fries, so-and-so, out of a certain can. If it looked like rain, Christine was to turn the water spout into the cistern. But if it rained too long, it ought to be turned out before it started to run over. And Christine was to pick the sweet peas and nasturtiums. John and Eloise Deal with Wentworth and Laura and Millard came for Abby in the big sedan. Abby had on her black silk with white collar and cuffs, a new hat with a noble-appearing pom-pom on one side, which the milliner had told her looked chic. Above Abby's old wrinkled face, it looked as chic as a painted one would have looked atop a portrait of Whistler's mother. She had had the quilt done up in a big flat package, and she put her feet on it in the car as though it might, from sheer naturalness of the roses, ramble out of the sedan window. The pearls in the little box she held tightly in the bag in her hands. The big car shot over the graveled roads. Wentworth was at the wheel. Abby wished John would do the driving. As a matter of fact, Wentworth, born to the wheel with all the younger generation, was more of an alert driver, but Abby could not think so. You know, Wentworth, I wish you wouldn't go so fast. Can we go a little slower and see the country better? You're sort of cracked about the country, aren't you, Grandma? Yes, I guess I am, Wentworth. But if you'd gone over these same roads in a covered wagon when there wasn't even a trail in the grass, you'd be too. At the top of a hill, John said something to his son, and the big car slowed down and stopped. Take a drink, Mother. John waved his hand to the panorama before them. But don't get intoxicated. In the distance, the Platte sprawled out lazily in the morning sun, the thick foliage of its tree borders green against the sky's summer blue. There were acres of yellow wheat stubble where once the buffalo had wallowed, fields of corn where once the prairie grass had grown, great comfortable homes and barns where once soddies had stood. There were orchards and pastures and cattle, and a town nestling under the sheltering shade of huge trees, and soft white languorous clouds slipped into the east. As they looked, there was a humming sound, and like one of the dragonflies from the old creek bed, an aeroplane came out of the southwest. As direct and as fast as the southwest winds, it shot toward Omaha. Back over the road that the Deals and Lutzes and the Reinmüller's plodding oxen had come, from the hilltop near the Platte, Abby Deal watched the mail plane go back over the road that the plodding oxen had come. They slipped into Omaha at 10 o'clock. The Omaha that had been the raw frontier town was now a city nearly 250,000. Mac, at home from the bank, came out to meet them when they turned into the driveway. The Mackenzie Deal place, a huge brick structure, with its clipped lawn, its sunken gardens, and its lily pools, was lovely in the morning sunlight. And it belonged to a man who had lived in a soddy until his 13th year, and to a woman whose first home on the prairie was hung with burlap to keep out the cold. "Let me take your bag, Mother." "Take the package, Mac, but I want to carry this myself." And they all laughed that Mother would trust no one with the pearls. She got slowly out of the car, her limbs a little numb. For a few moments she could not walk steadily, so that Mac put his arm around her and helped her up the wide steps. In the house, Abby asked at once for Catherine. The moment had come. It had been 62 years coming, and now it was here. The winds had blown it by. The wind she could not stop. The clock hands had ticked it off. The time she could not stay. Old Abby Deal, with her snow-white hair and her 80 years beginning to set heavily upon her, climbed the mahogany stairway with its imported carpet, a ladder with sapling cross pieces, bare pine steps, a mahogany-railed stairway with thick imported carpet. Catherine was in her room. Abby knocked and went in, the little bag tightly clutched in her hand. "Well, Granny?" Catherine did not seem flippant today. She was gentle, a little tender. She kissed her grandmother with genuine affection and sat down beside her. "Here they are, dear." Abby laid the pearls in Catherine's lap, her blue-veined hands trembling. It was as though they had brought everything to Catherine, had heaped their all into her lap, the fruits of their labor, the results of their pioneering. The price of the prairie had been paid. The debt was canceled. For Catherine, they had fought the prairie fires, split open the prairie furrows, and planted the corn. For Catherine, they had set out the trees and made the roads and built the bridges. Catherine took the pearls out of their little velvet box. "Thanks, Granny dear. They're darling." There was no great surprise. She had spoken in a matter-of-fact way. "Thanks, Granny dear. They're darling." Well, she could not sense it. She was young and never had wanted for a thing in her life. She could not realize all the hardships which had been undergone since Abby Deal's wedding night, all the privations which had been endured while the pearls lay in a box for 62 years, waiting for the time to come when a Mackenzie bride could wear them. "I want to tell you about them. Could you, for just a few minutes, Kathy? I don't want to take your time." "Sure, Granny. Tell me about them." "They were Isabel Anders Mackenzie's, Kathy. After her death, they came to my mother's. And then she gave them to me in the old log cabin on my wedding night. They always seemed to me a sort of symbol, standing for everything that was fine and artistic and lovely. You probably don't understand, but the work on the land in our early days was so hard that it took all our time and strength to keep body and soul together. There was neither time nor opportunity for the things that many of us wanted with all our hearts to do. But we kept our eyes on a sort of gleam ahead, a hope that our boys and girls could have all the things we could not have. And so the pearls became a symbol to me of those things. I said Margaret could wear them at her wedding, thinking we would have everything to go with them, but you can't always do with life what you wish. Sometimes life does things to you. And so we didn't have much to do with, and Margaret was married without them. Isabel was married suddenly on the eve of a war, and Grace never married. And now they're yours, the first granddaughter to marry." They've gone in a sort of circle from wealth through hard times back to prosperity. I'll love them, Granny. Catherine kissed her grandmother again. Then she rose and slipped her arm through Abby's. Now, Granny, I want you to come in and see the spoils of war. Out in the upper hall, with the Persian rugs hanging over the mahogany-railed balcony, most of the relatives seemed gathering. Margaret and Dr. Baker had just driven in. Isabel and Harrison Rhodes had arrived the previous evening. Stanley and young Dr. Fred's wives were both there with their children. One room had been converted into a receiving room for the gifts, and it was into this one that the whole clan gathered. Dainty gifts from exclusive shops were there. Many countries had contributed their loveliest to Catherine Deal. Abby, wandering among the tables, made little clucking noises of delight. My, Kathy, whatever can you do with them all? How beautiful! And to think I was happy to get some quilts and plain dishes and an old rooster and 6 hens. Mac came in and wandered aimlessly about. Everyone was there in the room now. Mac and Emma, Isabel and Harrison, Margaret and Dr. Baker, Grace, John, and Eloise, Laura, Wentworth, Stanley, and Fred Baker Jr.'s wives, Catherine and Jimmy Buchanan. Suddenly it seemed to Abby that there was some concerted plan that they should all gather. 2 or 3 were whispering mysteriously. Are you ready, Daddy? It was Catherine. There's something else we want to show you, Granny. We're too anxious for you to see. Abby turned toward Catherine, who was holding the cord of a silken drape in her hand. Kathy's head was thrown back, her eyes merry. She was excited about something. All set? Eyes front and guide right, Granny. She pulled the silken cord and the drape parted. Behind the soft folds there hung a huge painting in a wide, dull gold frame. The painting of a lovely lady in velvet draperies, her reddish-brown hair curling over her shoulder, a string of pearls at her neck. A hat with a sweeping plume was in one hand, held by long, slender fingers that tapered at the ends. Catherine waved an airy hand. Here she is, Granny. Allow me to introduce you to Isabel Anders Mackenzie, painted with my pearls on her, the little wretch. Abby Deal stared. The faint coloring of excitement under her old cheeks slipped away. One hand went to her wrinkled throat and the other above her pounding heart. She turned to Mac. You don't? Not really. Mac, it isn't. Yes, it is, Mother. Your grandmother. My great-grandmother. Kathy's great-great-grandmother. It's the original, and it costs like the old Harry, but Catherine has been after me ever since she heard you tell about it. I had the deuce of a time getting it, too. The agent traced it from Aberdeen to London and then to Edinburgh and back to London. Abby turned to the picture again. Can you beat it, Granny? Catherine was laughing and calling to her. All in one fell swoop, I get 6 tons of china, 9 carloads of silver, a darling new house, a homely new husband, and a snobocratic ancestor and her pearls. Abby Deal stood in front of the picture with Catherine's flippant words rippling past her. Old Abby Deal, with her snow-white hair in its neat little knot at the back of her head, her dumpy pudding bag figure, and her long, gnarled fingers that tapered at the ends, stood and stared at the picture. And standing there, looking up at the lovely lady, old Abby Deal began to cry. They are the most painful tears in the world, the tears of the aged, for they come from dried beds where the emotions have long burned low. Mac put an arm around his mother and patted her shoulder awkwardly. Why, Mother dear. Catherine, we shouldn't have. I never thought. Mother, only the pleasure. They all closed around her, making comments. Jimmy Buchanan and Wentworth stood off, a little embarrassed. The others all explained it volubly to each other. It was too much of a surprise. Yes, she's too old to have a surprise sprung. The trip up here was too much for Mother at her age. It's those weeks of sewing. I told her that quilt was too much. No, it's the whole excitement together. Laura Deal came through the little knot. It isn't any of those reasons, is it, Grandma? She said. I know what it is, but I don't know how to say it. Abby dried her eyes. I'm all right now. She even smiled at them. My, Kathy. Tears on your wedding day. Whatever will you think? How selfish of me. I'm not ashamed. But when I saw the lovely lady that I used to dream about, it just came over me in a sort of wave. All the wonderful things I planned to do when I was young and never did.